All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a really great panel lined up for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance and the Engineering Biology Research Consortium's webinar on policy and governance for sustainable bioeconomy. We just wanted to put out a plug for this special issue that we have coming out here. The Journal of Science Policy and Governance, or JSPG, and EBRC are working together to release this call for papers for a competition of papers to provide policymakers with policy perspectives, scientific analyses of demonstrating how engineering biology and emerging biotechnology can provide sustainable solutions for the reinvention of products and processes across all sectors for this special issue on advancing science and technology policy for the next generation bioeconomy. So if folks are interested in submitting a paper, we're looking for early career folks who are interested in, applying their skills in synthetic biology, genetic engineering, biology, and microbiology, other life sciences, or any field of science that you're interested in applying to the bioeconomy, or if you're also just interested in learning a little more about the bioeconomy and diving deep into the policy implications for this sector. We definitely encourage you all to submit papers for this special issue. Papers are going to be due on January 13th, and you can find information on our website for how to submit. I'll add a link to it in the chat here a little bit further into the session. But I wanted to kick off by welcoming our speakers that we have here today with us. We have Dr. Michael Kopka from LanzaTech, Dr. Aaron Reese-Clayton from the Good Food Institute, and Georgia Lagudis from Brown University's the Pandemic Center. And I'm going to do some brief bios for us to start. In just a minute, I'm going to add a few more people from the waiting room before we get started with our panel. So first, want to welcome Dr. Erin Reese-Clayton. She's a senior scientific research advisor at the Good Food Institute, where she works to identify research needs for the alternative protein field and to mobilize research funding for the development of open access alternative protein research. She received her PhD in genetics from Duke University and a master's in public health and epidemiology from the University of Michigan, where she was previously on the research faculty. We also want to welcome Dr. Michael Kopka, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at LanzaTech, a company that uses bacteria to convert carbon emissions into sustainably produced fuels and chemicals. He has over 500 patents and 50 publications and has been awarded the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award for greener synthetic pathways by the Environmental Protection Agency. He received his PhD in microbiology and biotechnology at Ulm University in Germany. And then also want to welcome Dr. Georgia Lagudis, who's a senior fellow at the Brown University School of Public Health Pandemic Center, where she leads initiatives on clean indoor air to reduce disease transmission. She was recently served as a senior advisor for biotechnology and the bioeconomy at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she coordinated the drafting and implementation of an executive order on advancing the American bioeconomy, as well as launching a White House initiative to improve indoor air quality. She has a PhD in biological engineering from MIT. So a big welcome to our panelists. Thank you so much all for joining. For folks on this call who may not know me, my name is Hannah Fry. I am the Director of Programs and Events over here at JSPG, in addition to being a Senior Policy Advisor at MIT in my day job. So I am going to kick it off first by opening up the floor to our panelists to give a brief overview of how their work fits into a sustainable bioeconomy, as well as also a little bit of background. I know I understand we have a lot of early career folks who may be looking at, like what kind of career options are available for them. So in addition to talking about your work on sustainable bioeconomy, if you could also give a brief overview of your career path and, how you ended up where you are today. So I'll turn it over to Michael here first.
Great. Thanks for the kind introduction and happy to be part of the panel. I think looking forward to a great discussion. Giving a little bit background about LanzaTech. So LanzaTech developed a carbon recycling technology, so capturing carbon and transforming it to a range of useful products. So just one example, I think the shirt that I'm wearing here, I think this started as emissions from a steel plant, which through LanzaTech's technology being converted. At the core of LanzaTech's biology is really biology. In a lot of ways, to me, biology is the original circular carbon economy. If you look at nature, there's not really such a thing as waste. I think everything's recycled down to the very atom. Just consider the cherry tree. I think it makes fruit, it flowers on fruit that feeds us humans, animals. But then if those fall to the ground, they're not waste. I think they nourish other ecosystems, which in turn, I think, feed the tree again. And really that's what inspired LanzaTech, this approach of a circular economy and carbon economy. And if you look at today's carbon cycle, I think it's mostly based on biology on a global scale. And in fact, life on Earth might have started with CO2, with some early autotrophic microbes and archaea. And at LanzaTech, we really turned to this ancient biology and combined it with industrial scale and industrial manufacturing. If you think that those maybe hydrothermal vents where life on Earth might have started, I think they're not too dissimilar from industrial smokestack. You have carbon oxides flowing through, you have reduced conditions, you have transition metals, and yeah, we have identified microbes that can thrive under these conditions and then established an industrial fermentation process along with that. Conceptually, you can think about this process not too dissimilar from a standard fermentation, but instead of sugars and yeast, we use these autotrophic bacteria that then feed on carbon oxide waste gases that we feed into the bioreactors. And we've evolved and optimized these microbes over the years. I think there's some key differences, I think, in terms of the fermentation process, in that we had to develop new bioreactors to efficiently feed those gases and dissolve those gases into liquid to make available for the microbes. And also developed a really continuous process similar to how the chemical industry works. From a feedstock perspective, these gases can be very different inputs. It can be inputs from the heavy industries, think about steel or ferroalloy production. Typically, those gases are already reduced, have some energy content, but typically are ending up in the atmosphere, and we can capture those. Can also use CO2 directly with, for example, green hydrogen as energy source. And then we can also use a variety of different solid carbonous wastes, including biomass waste or municipal solid waste, which can be gasified into a syngas, which then can feed into our process. So essentially, on this side, helping emitters to reduce their carbon emissions. But at the same time, we also work with brands on their sustainability paths and producing sustainable products. Our first product is ethanol as a versatile building block, a chemical platform that can be used as fuel, including can be upgraded to sustainable aviation fuel, for which we spun out a company, LanzaJet. Can be used as for cleaning fragrances, and it can also be a building block for materials like polyesters. And then through synthetic biology or engineering biology, we can also make other building blocks such as acetone or isopropanol, which again have a variety of uses, for example, as disinfectants or acrylic glass. Today, I think we've got over 100 products from various brands that consumers can buy. So if someone's still looking for holiday gifts last minute, it's actually pretty cool. I think, for example, with brands like REI, you can now go on their homepage and search for LanzaTech, and you get a variety of products made with our technology. Yeah, just to wrap up, I think today we have 6 commercial plants, about 300,000 tons of production capacity for sustainable products. And at the same time, we can abate about 500,000 tons of CO2 emissions each year with this technology. But it took LanzaTech, it's been quite a journey. I think it took us almost 20 years to get to this point. I think, or 15 years, I think, to scale this technology from really the bench into the field through various pilot and demonstrations, now to commercial scale, where we operate in bioreactors over about 1 million liters. I personally got involved over about 15 years ago At that time, the company was still a small startup, maybe 20 to 30 people operating almost out of a garage still at that point, still at proof of concept stage. But through one of the scientific advisors of the company, I got connected with the company's founder, Sean Simpson, and really kind of liked the mission and motivation of the company. At that time, I was in academia working on essentially pioneering genetic tools for these gas fermenting organisms, and really interested in the applied and translation side. So I think that's how I got engaged with the company. The company at that point was started in New Zealand, so I think went over to the other side of the globe and joined the company and Sean on his mission. And yeah, now not almost 15 years later, I think we have commercialized the technology. We have kind of a new R&D center and headquarters in Chicago, and we're the first carbon capture company that's traded on Nasdaq.
Thank you so much, Michael. And Erin, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Erin, and I am a scientist with the Good Food Institute, or GFI. GFI is an international nonprofit advancing alternative proteins as an essential solution needed to meet global climate, biodiversity, public health, and food security goals. We define alternative proteins as meat made from plants, cultivated from animal cells, or produced via microbial fermentation. And one of my little soapboxes is that even though proteins get the focus with alternative proteins, foods are really complex materials. And so actually, there's a lot of really great work going into lipids and fats, carbohydrates and starches, vitamins and other molecules, all of the things that are necessary to make these complex foods. At GFI, we work to accelerate alternative protein innovation across three primary areas: science and technology, policy, and corporate engagement. And we do that by mapping out the neglected areas that are needed to help alternative proteins compete on taste, price, and nutrition. We fund open access scientific research. We create a lot of resources to help educate scientists, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and other stakeholders. And we advocate for more public funding and incentives for alternative proteins. And we really believe that as global demand for protein-rich foods continues to increase, diversifying protein production can be an essential strategy for building resilience, improving resource efficiency, and promoting food security. Specifically, we see alternative proteins helping to create a more sustainable bioeconomy by utilizing existing food and ag side streams and innovative feedstocks to help promote circularity and reduce waste. Alternative proteins can produce nutrient-dense foods with less land and natural resource requirements. They provide an opportunity to create new jobs and economic opportunities. And something that I think is really exciting is they also help promote collaboration across economic sectors and parts of the bioeconomy. So ultimately, diversifying food and protein production can help bolster our food resilience and national security, and can also open up new markets for the crops that are produced on American farms across the country. In terms of my background and how I got to where I am today, I've been with GFI for a little over 8 years now. And even 9 years ago, I never would have guessed that I'd be doing what I'm doing now. My career path has definitely not been linear, but as I look back, I can see how different pieces along the way have kind of gotten me to where I am today. A lot of my current work does sit at the intersection of science and policy. My educational training was all science focused, but very broad in that, everything from chemistry and molecular genetics to epidemiology and the social determinants of health. And I've always had an interest in science communication. How do we really talk about science in a way that resonates with people? And how do we use science and apply it to real world problems? my science policy work really began when I joined GFI. And so the policy side of my training has all been on the job. So I'm very thankful to work at an organization with a policy and government relations team that I can learn from. And in terms of GFI and alternative proteins specifically, it's really been an opportunity to combine all areas of my scientific training to advocate for public support and funding for R&D that will advance science-based solutions to complex societal challenges.
That's great. And Georgia, I'll turn it over to you next. And I also want to make a plug for a note that Georgia put in the chat for folks to, if you would like to share your background and to, where you're coming from, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm delighted to follow Michael and Aaron. Hi, everyone. I'm Georgia. Yeah, I would love if people can just drop in the chat. Our folks mostly students at universities, coming from a company. Would love to kind of get a quick pulse check on who we're chatting with today. I'll share a little bit about my work, mostly my past work that has contributed to this from what Hannah referenced. So I'm currently part of the faculty at the School of Public Health at Brown, and I'm focused on a slightly different topic, thinking about disease transmission indoors at the DC-based Brown Pandemic Center. But just before this, I was at the White House for 2 years at the Office of Science and Technology Policy and had the opportunity to help draft and then lead an executive order signed by President Biden on the bioeconomy. And was really excited for this line of work because I had also been in the Senate before that, a few years before that, and helped contribute to a bill that was turned into law through the Chips and Science Act that passed in August of 2022 that included a Bioeconomy Research and Development Act. And it was really cool. I'll take a moment. I think many of you, it seems like, working in the biotech space or field, it had been for many years, I think the primary focus had been on pharma and drug development. And I absolutely felt that being in that ecosystem or bubble, you might say, in Boston. And maybe this ties to my own career, but part of what led me to be really interested in this field was that I felt there was so much more of an opportunity to tag biotechnology with developing sustainable solutions in our world and helping our world be a more circular place and addressing climate goals. And so part of my work at the Senate and then at the White House was helping leaders and the broader public understand that biotechnology can and does have a major impact in other goals, other societal goals, in addition to health goals. And so the executive order that we released in September 2 years ago was about advancing the American bioeconomy in health, in energy, in climate, in food and agriculture, and supply chains, and then kind of supporting some of the basic and cross-cutting goals too. And so through that work, we were trying to uplift that there were multiple departments and agencies that led major research programs that contribute to the bioeconomy. And it's just as important to uplift what the Department of Energy is doing and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as well as what the Department of Health and Human Services is doing. And so something we did was publish a report out of the executive order on bold goals for the U.S. biotechnology and biomanufacturing. And there were 5 chapters, and I give this as an example of what does it look like to try to craft a vision for the federal government on sustainability with biotechnology. And so each of these 5 chapters, we asked one agency to write each. So the Department of Energy wrote one on climate and energy solutions. The U.S. Department of Agriculture wrote one on food and agriculture. And they both work together on each because there's some opportunities that intersect. And each of them articulated 10 bold goals that are quantifiable and not necessarily for the U.S. federal government to drive towards, but broadly the United States to have as goalposts that we can aim for in the next 5 and 20 years. And so those might give, the group, I can drop a link in the chat. Some of those might give a group a few examples of what are types of, all these different topics that the Department of Energy might think about for sustainability and how biotechnology can be used in that. Right, an example, pulling this up in front of me, I just kind of sleep with it under my pillow. It's a really fun, comfortable thing to have nearby. One is about, I'm trying to find this because I haven't looked at it for a hot second. developing a circular economy for materials. And they say in 20 years, we want to demonstrate and deploy cost-effective routes to convert bio-based feedstocks into recyclable by design polymers that can displace 90% of today's plastics. So how can we create sustainable and bio-based feedstocks that can allow us to have more circular economy with plastics? That's one example, but as a result of these, the publication of, and here I'll give an example of how policy, Michael and Aaron have much more technical expertise with product development and the research landscape. So I defer to them in talking in our future discussion about products, but I think a lot about the 30,000-foot level in policy. But through this work of the Department of Energy, that led to them then setting some priorities within the department that basically moved money to try to move programs. And so they announced an Earthshot that was the Clean Fuels and Products Earthshot that said we want to drive towards some quantifiable goals in that space that included bio-based contributions to creating fuels and products using biomanufacturing. And they've also put in new research funding and product development funding for facilities and infrastructure as well. So all that kind of paints a scene of some of what has been in my mind, at least working at the White House. And then maybe just another word on my own career path. I was really fortunate to have an opportunity to enter policy through the AAAS Science and Tech Policy Fellowship Program. Excellent program, great way if you don't have policy experience to be able to come to government and have that experience. That was how I came and worked at the Senate 5 years ago. And from there, continued on that path at the Department of State for some time, and then at the White House. And I think maybe my own fun nugget is, if I had looked back when I graduated with my PhD and I had been deeply steeped in technical work, I thought there was no way I could contribute. I couldn't imagine contributing to policy work that included writing an executive order or helping draft a bill. And there's nothing to stop you. Policy is way easier than getting a PhD in something. And the hard part about policy is actually the hard part of writing a PhD, which is that you often don't have a defined end product or no one will feed you the answer. And I think the hard part about PhD is that you have to develop your own route of asking the right question and going to find those answers. And I think that's what interests me with policy is that often I'm finding the really smart people that can give good ideas and then try to turn that into practice. Okay, Hannah, back to you.
I love it. Thank you. So wanted to kick off with a few kind of questions before we move to audience questions at the end. So just kind of to help really set a framework for this discussion, I was wondering if you guys talked a little bit about this in your intros, but if you could talk a little bit more about what role do biotechnologies play in reducing our carbon footprint, whether this be across agriculture, manufacturing, energy production. And then, for folks on our panel who might be more comfortable answering this, of like what role can governments or policymakers play in helping to facilitate that? I'll let you guys think of who wants to tackle it first.
Yeah, I'm happy to start maybe at least from a technology side first. I think in my mind, first of all, I think the transition to renewable energy will I think make the most impact on reducing our global emissions. I think and also necessary to advance a lot of decarbonization efforts. That being said, I think biology can and will have a significant impact in many areas, in my view, and in particular can help on difficult to decarbonize challenges. I've already obviously talked about what LanzaTech's doing as one example for carbon capture and transformation. I think there's obviously a lot of other efforts. I think looking at gas fermentation, there's meanwhile, I think 40 other companies at various stages now that also look at using similar technology that includes also other important greenhouse gases like methane, using those as feedstocks, for example. And also, I think on the carbon capture side, I think there's obviously now also efforts, I think, looking at using enzymes for direct air capture, for example. So a lot of effort going on there. You also mentioned on the manufacturing side, I think we see a growing range of biomanufactured products that offer sustainability advantages, but also things like, I think Georgia mentioned that biodegradability, for example, or other advanced properties And traditionally, I think a lot of these efforts are sugar-based, but I think there's certainly, I think, increased focus and effort now on accessing waste feedstocks, obviously gases, but also I think plastics or other kind of wastes. And I think that's really one area where I think biology can be really kind of differentiating, making use of these feedstocks that are kind of very heterogeneous, chaotic, very kind of differentiating a lot, I think, from batch to batch, which I think is something that traditional catalysis really has challenges handling, but biology is more flexible in that sense. And then I see also huge potentials in the egg and food sector, and I'm sure Erin will talk more about that. But I think if we just look at the Haber-Bosch process, I think super energy and carbon intense. I think there's now ways to kind of make biological fertilizer, use microbes as fertilizers. I think thinking about Pivot Bio and the range of a lot of other companies and approaches. And I think also, I think looking at kind of the cattle, I think looking at reducing methane emissions from cattle farming, and then also looking at alternative proteins and yeah, I think possible food was one example, but many other companies in this space, and I'm sure Erin can talk much more about that. And by the way, you can also make, for example, proteins from CO2, which is actually a capability LanzaTech has now also developed and scaling. I think a part of it, certainly, I think also that should be considered is, I think, ecosystem and biodiversity conservation and resilience. Which I think should be part of that, where I think biology can make an impact, or engineering biology in particular, to make our ecosystems more resilient. I think looking at our crops, for example, as well. Overall, I think biology already, I think, contributing at megatons of greenhouse gas level reductions as a society. Obviously, with all technology, we need to get to the gigaton level of CO2 reduction. So I think we have technologies that are really ready to scale and implement. So I think that's to me certainly a focus. How can we support these first of its kind production facilities and advance these technologies from out of the labs or pilot into kind of commercial utilization. And then I think a lot of new kind of approaches and initiatives now possible. I think there's also the advancements in engineering biology, and the EBRC as one example here, for example, published a roadmap on kind of research efforts around climate and sustainability in the engineering biology field, which I played a role with. But that's really been developed by over 100, by almost 100 researchers from across academia, industry, government, NGOs. So I think that there's a lot of really kind of ideas and aspects there that I think can really make an impact, and particularly looking at where biology can make an impact. And then also some of the more societal questions, for example, using engineered microbes in the field or in cattle, what would that like, and what needs to happen there as well from a more regulatory view and safety aspects. So that might leave
Erin,
some room for the others to comment, but happy to talk more about policy aspect as well. But I'm sure Georgia has more on that.
Sure, I can add a little bit, and if Erin wants to add. Hannah, I'm going to take your question, if I remember how you asked it, not just about products, but like how can policy activate bioproduct development to support sustainability goals? I think I'll give an example. So one is, how can the federal government incentivize I'm not talking about regulation, but incentivize the production of bioproducts, right? There's federal grants that can support research and development. There's federal loans that can support actually developing infrastructure. And there can also be federal incentives or advanced procurement, otherwise of like using the purchasing power of the federal government. And one of these is an example of a program out of the US Department of Agriculture called the BioPreferred program. This is a program that has been a bit under the radar, but there has been work to try to uplift it and elevate it through the executive order and I think through some forthcoming work. So in this program, USDA certifies products, and I know, Michael, like the definition of what is a bioproduct, and like also what LanzaTech is doing, like how do you define what a bioproduct is? I think that it is good for that to still be kind of in formation development, because we should have an expansive definition, especially for targeting towards end goals and end states, rather than like how do you actually define if it's a 25% biomass. But something like this type of a program allows the USDA to put a stamp on a product or give you some certification. And then it also has some levers that encourages federal procurement officers. So giving an example, the Department of Defense is one of the largest purchasers of supplies in the world. And I actually don't have a number, probably I should, up my sleeve, which is how many billions or trillions of dollars does the Department of Defense spend on products each year. But there are ways to leverage the Department of Defense deciding what kind of paint or plastic coating do I use for my F-15 fighter jets, or the paint on my military defense installations, or the food that's consumed by soldiers, all of that. There's some kind of ongoing slow work to say, how do we incentivize not only, made in America, which has been something that has been going on for a number of years, but also things like sustainability or biopreferred program. So it's one example of like the federal government having a lever to incentivize uptake of products.
I'll just jump in with a couple last points. I think Michael and Georgia have done a great job covering this question. And I think, alternative proteins along with other biotechnologies that are part of the bioeconomy, Michael touched on how they help reduce emissions. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities in the space of converting existing carbon into high value, useful feedstocks. And this is a great example of where you see all the sectors of the bioeconomy being able to learn from one another. Microbial fermentation is being used for chemicals, food, protein, biofuels, all sorts of different things. And so I think it's really exciting to think about all the potential applications of these technologies. And in the food space particularly, and another advantage that comes from alternative proteins is just the reduction in land use. A lot of our land is used for agriculture. And if there are ways that we can produce more nutritious food on less land, I think it just gives us a lot of opportunities to use that land in other ways. And also, hopefully countries around the world, we can stop clearing forest and other areas to grow food. And then just one additional comment related to how governments can incentivize adoption of these technologies at large scale. Just one point I'd like to make is that I think maybe, at least from the scientist perspective, the first place I go is more R&D. And I absolutely think we need more research. There's still a lot of questions to be answered, a lot of technical bottlenecks to overcome. But I also think there's a lot of need for capacity. And so how can governments assist with scale up? How can they de-risk infrastructure? And what types of education and workforce development programs can they incentivize or start so that we can be making sure that we're training the people that will be working in these jobs in the coming years?
That's great. And, one thing I also wanted to ask you all a little bit about is, what are some technologies that you see as being really at the forefront? Like Aaron, you said, we need more R&D, but we also need that scale up piece. So, what are some biotechnologies that you kind of see coming up the pipeline, and what do we need in order to bring them to that scale?
Yeah, I'll hop in quick here and then pass it over to Michael and Georgia. But obviously not surprising to anyone, I think alternative proteins have a big role to play in the future bioeconomy. But underlying that, I think looking across some really foundational technologies, there are things like synthetic biology and genomic engineering, especially for crops and microbes that I think can benefit a lot of different sectors. Advanced manufacturing, things like 3D printing, Michael mentioned earlier, like innovative bioreactor designs. And then the computational data science side of things with machine learning and AI. I think there's just a lot of upcoming technologies that can, play a role across all of these different sectors facing the bioeconomy. And again, the things that we need to kind of bring these things to scale and to real world problems are this investment in R&D, infrastructure. I think supply chains for the bioeconomy. Georgia mentioned that as part of the focus in the bold goals, like building out these supply chains are going to be really important. And then the education and workforce, like I mentioned previously.
Yeah, maybe to continue, I think I already mentioned a couple, but certainly I think adding there on the synthetic biology side, I think there's a lot of exciting development, a lot of opportunity now to more also access different systems that are kind of non-traditional or non-model, I think going beyond kind of the one or two platforms that we had. I think certainly would need to mention AI as well, but I think that will certainly make an impact and starting to make an impact in all fields, especially will also be impacting biology and the speed we can translate biology, but I think we do need data sets to power that. So I think that's been traditionally, I think, a challenge with biology getting these high throughput data sets. I think more modern biofoundry approaches certainly, I think, allowed to do that. So I think we'll certainly, I think, see a lot of development there. And then I think biomanufacturing in general is something that I think we've seen kind of a lot of advancements of different processes, including gas fermentation. I think it's important, I think, to look at different feedstocks. And then I think also, I think there's still a lot of opportunities around continuous processing downstream that I think is really important. I think overall, I think it's also been, I think, mentioned in the chat there by Roger. I think looking at how can we make these technologies as competitive as possible, especially I think with traditional kind of fossil-based technologies that have obviously been optimized for decades, been kind of highly integrated at large scale. So I think how can we kind of advance these new technologies that enable first of its kind technologies to scale, I think, and get them to a stage where I think they're established and the infrastructure is in place, and where do we have opportunities to have advanced or opportunities to have advanced products. In general, I think coming off George's point, I think technologies should be really neutral and outcome based, and I think it should be a level playing field. And I think right now there's still a lot of incentives for fossil technologies, and I think we certainly, I think, not looking also at kind of some of the other costs in terms of factoring those in the costs we pay for, I think, climate change and mitigation as well. So I think one area that certainly I think can help is also having a fraction of renewable or recycled content in products, for example.
So I wanted to ask a question before we turn it over to the audience. Creating a sustainable bioeconomy is something that is shared by multiple governments across the world, and it's going to be a very international effort. So I was wondering if any of you had some thoughts on how the international community can best work together on shared goals to advance the bioeconomy.
I can take a first pass at that. First, I see India, Hook Bernard on the call from EBRC. India, glad to have you here and glad to have you co-sponsoring. I know EBRC has done some important work over the past 2 years or so, helping facilitate international engagement and collaboration. And I know that they also led an effort around global standards development with biomanufacturing. And I think that's an example of on the boots on the ground, what does it look like to advance standards that can help product development, not just the United States, but accelerate that worldwide and drive the entire ecosystem of biomanufacturing. And I think that's very different than having a set of world leaders sit around a table and say, rah, 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 biomanufacturing is great. But like, what do you actually do to accelerate it? And I think you need both. You need kind of both approaches. But I think the coordination of the research and product development community is really important. And I think similarly in the United States, we can learn a lot from workforce training for biomanufacturing, fermentation engineers and others that we don't really have a lot of those programs in the United States. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but can look to other countries to do some of that and then share resources, vice versa. And I think there are a lot of opportunities, not just with like the standards development, but broadly in the data infrastructure and ecosystem. And like exactly what that is, I think you get into some finer technical details, so won't dive into that. But I think databases, large scale data collection, how we use and interpret and use data to inform results, I think is really important for international sharing.
Really good points about Georgia. I think if you look at the climate crisis, there's obviously also a global issue, and I think standards been mentioned. I think that's certainly something. I think globally, I think it's important to work together. I think looking at things like life cycle assessments, which obviously make a huge play a huge role. I think in terms of the sustainability. I think. There's not really common standards currently, so I think if we can, I think get advanced things like that, I think that certainly will help. And I think there's some region I think that looks more incentives, some more looking at taxing. I think there's certainly differences in those regards. And then there's aspects like, I think, sustainable aviation fuel, which is obviously very international. So if you have different regions having different policies there, I think that makes it very difficult as well. And ultimately, I think it will also, I think, policies be one of the factor besides availability, for example, of renewable energy, where some of these technology will be implemented first, and I think will become leaders in those technologies. So yeah, really hoping, I think, in the US that there's a continuous focus on advancing some of these technologies, which really can also then help us obviously domestic supplies and all of that as well.
I fully agree with what Georgia and Michael said. I think just to like zoom way out and think about this, if we look at predictions for global population and the geographic distribution of people in the year 2050, it is almost all in Africa and Asia. In some respects, and think about this from a food perspective. In some respects, it won't matter at that point what the US is eating on a global scale. And that's not entirely true, but so much of the population is in other parts of the world. And so I think just keeping in mind that some of these societal challenges that we want to address really are global issues. And the only way we're going to be able to solve those is by being a global community and collaborating internationally. So that doesn't really answer the question, but I think just puts the emphasis on the fact that international collaboration, I feel like, is absolutely essential.
Well said. And I wanted to make sure that we got to audience questions from our members that joined us on this call. So I put out the call for folks to raise their hands and ask questions of our panelists. If folks are shy, I can ask other questions, but all right, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Hi, everyone. Elizabeth Kennedy. I head up government relations at Activate. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit that supports entrepreneurial fellows, so mainly PhDs, postdocs, scientists, and engineers, though, who are commercializing their tech. And we've got about 30 or so companies that are bioindustrial focused. So this is a very, very specific question, but certainly in the U.S., there are a number of different federal agencies that focus on this work, and Biomade in particular has been a really important one and has been very involved in the Biomanufacturing Executive Order. I know I've talked to Georgia about this, who's very generously taken her time to discuss this with me. One thing, and again, very specific, they do great work, but one thing that are early stage companies, so such an important part of the pipeline, are the companies that are developing innovative technologies that are going to allow us to manufacture things better and are going to be fueling the pipeline of things that will be manufactured. Something our companies are really struggling with is the IP terms that Biomade has as a part of their membership. So for those of who aren't familiar, Biomade, if you are a member and you receive money from them, so money very critical to our early companies. If you receive money from them, you own your IP, but there's a requirement that you license it to other members. And certainly they're trying to encourage relationships from large corporates that are looking to engage, particularly with academic institutions and researchers, that relationship might be less of an issue for them. But for our startups where IP is so crucial and they're still figuring out some of their product market fit and things like that. I'm not sure if anyone here has come across this as an issue or what we might be able to think about there as far as again, this organization that's been so critical to supporting the bioeconomy and bioindustrials, and where we might be able to do a better job of supporting startups that are looking to engage more with Biomade in particular, or if there are other agencies that you're certainly there's this IP management that Biomade has, and could be challenging for them to kind of upset the apple cart and change the way that they do things. But maybe there are other agencies that you would suggest might do things differently that could be a better fit specifically for early stage companies.
Anyone want to take a crack?
I mean, just commenting, that's certainly one area we've also found challenging, and we're Biomade members as well, and it's great efforts that coming out of Biomade. But that's certainly one area. It's obviously a member-driven organization, so there's obviously also, I think, opportunities, I think, to address this within Biomade. But yeah, I think that's certain IP certainly always a consideration, especially for early stage companies and startups. And in general, I think is something that's always a consideration. Obviously, in partnerships, or also I think receiving funding. So I think it's certainly, I think, a kind of aspect where I think sometimes yeah, you have to look at what areas you might be able to compromise more than others. I think there's maybe some core research areas that you maybe cannot compromise, but then there's maybe some areas where it's easier to partner, and that's consideration. Maybe some advice. Maybe I think George or others on the call maybe have a better view of specific agencies, but I think from what I see, I think there's more and more, I think that agencies have similar IP terms. Yeah. And domestic is obviously a part of that IP sought as well.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add to Michael's comments and Elizabeth. We had talked. I think it's worth, if your members care a lot about this and continue to have problems, write a letter and send that to Biomade. Write a letter and send that to Biomade's or controlling organization, which is Department of Defense, like the program officer there, and make sure that they're aware of it, and try to understand the problem, and then maybe go to other entities that support, like NSF supports a number of centers with research early stage companies, and maybe circling back with NSF or other groups that form these consortiums and see how they also model their IP usage.
Awesome. Super helpful. Thank you.
So if there are any potential authors on the call who are interested in digging into how intellectual property and technology transfer policy can help the biotechnology industry, maybe an idea for a paper. Other questions from the audience? Tushar, I see that you had a comment about wanting to raise your hand.
Yes, I did not see a raise hand option actually
That's
in the chat. Okay. So I'm a postdoc at PNNL and I work at DOE and my research is like basically what Georgia was describing. I think I kind of work on one of those programs that probably she made. So it's a program called Accelerate where we are kind of like looking at how industrial scale fermentations are less efficient compared to like lab scale. So like that's basically like my background currently, but I kind of want to go into the science policy as well at the same time. I'm an international student, and what I've noticed is that most of these fellowships require citizenship. So my question was to like anyone on the panel if we have any sort of advice of like how someone of my background should sort of like get into the field because I find it like very frustrating. And oftentimes when I ask that, is there a visa sponsorship opportunity? They just say no. So like anyone has any comment or suggestion, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Tushar, and appreciate your work there. And I hope you continue to stay engaged in this ecosystem and find opportunities in. I think finding folks that are like yourself that may not have US citizenship and seeing like picking someone that might be a couple years down the road ahead of you and what helped them enter that career path. I know, yeah, AAAS and some of these other federal government programs often don't have opportunities for US citizenships. I'm not sure about something like Horizon Institute for Public Service as another tech fellowship program. But yeah, I think you could probably go down a list. I don't know, Aaron or Hannah, you might have comments actually about fellowship opportunities. But I think also leadership within your organization can help connect you to an organization. Like if you want to work with either government or government adjacent, I think you work at a great place that folks are doing a lot of great work, and so they can help connect you. And even reaching out probably to India's organization, EBRC, may also help connect that because they do a lot of international work.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wanted
I
to
you can go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to flag, like Georgia said, the AAAS fellowship, it does have certain restrictions, but I was actually an alumni of the California Council of Science and Technology. So some of the state level fellowships have slightly different requirements. And that fellowship, I double checked it, it is open to permanent residents that have the work eligibility or US work visa. So, there are other state level fellowships, and also, like Georgia mentioned, there are some societies or philanthropic organizations that might have their own policy related fellowships that might have different requirements. So you can look there as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I did apply for a fellowship at Aspen Institute.
Okay.
They do have like a leadership program, and I was on a webinar by ACS a day before yesterday. So they gave a lot of tips too, actually, about that. They also mentioned CCST actually.
That's great. Do we have other questions from the audience here?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that one as well, since Georgia mentioned. And Hannah, I think everything you said, I would just agree with that, and that's true with EBRC as well. Is that there are some, depending on the project that we have that's ongoing, and depending on who's funding it, that might affect our ability to have an international postdoc. On the other hand, that international perspective is also really valuable, and we do have projects that are more like globally focused, and so at least in theory that could happen. Certainly the EBRC Student and Postdoc Association is, has international members and are also talking about this. So those kind of networks are also really great. Just, kind of along the lines of, as Georgia said, finding mentors or peer mentors or friends that who have are a couple of years ahead of you on that. And so that can help as well. So I just suggest checking out those kind of networks, including the EBRC and EBRC Postdoc Association, in addition to our science policy postdoc.
Thank you so much, India. So I have a quick question for the panelists. So, I was wondering, for all of you, if you were to submit a paper for on the issue of the science and technology policy for the bioeconomy, what are some topics that might be of interest to you? Or things that you might want to seed as ideas for people in the audience?
This is for us, Hannah, for us as panelists,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes, for the
great.
panelists.
Good, good, good. I see 4 of you did a thumbs up. I think more of you should submit. Like, why not? You should do it because it's great to put ideas out there. And in the process of writing it, you're going to learn a lot. When I would recommend thinking about who your audience is, I think there is a great exercise of going through an idea and fleshing it out. But in the end, if you're writing something in a science policy journal, you're wanting to tell someone to do something. And who is that someone? So who you're talking to. I think like 2 ideas come to mind. One is about generally leadership within the new administration of 2025. Why should they care about biomanufacturing and biotechnology? And I think there are a lot of really important tones here about economic security, domestic manufacturing, national security, and international competitiveness that resonate with both Democrats and Republicans. And I think in particularly leading in with what President Trump and his team may care about. There's an opportunity to say, like, what are the hooks of that? And who do you think in their leadership team should care or listen to one of your proposals? Some examples that were written previously a couple of months plus ago, or some of them a year ago, but you can give you an example I can throw in the chat unless someone is faster than me. I think the FAS day 1 proposals, I found it right here, actually. If you scroll down to the bottom, or just Control F for bioeconomy, there are a couple of bioeconomy proposals, and a lot of these memos are really nicely written. So I can give you an example of some of that. And the second audience I would, content you could think about is the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology. They are congressionally mandated organization that includes Congress members. They're releasing a report on emerging biotechnologies in the early new year. And they will then have a year or a year and a half to do implementation around that report. And part of that report will include draft legislative text, so policy ideas, and actually policy ideas written into legislative action. So I think the submission for the journal is pretty soon, Hannah, right? Early January.
Early January.
So you won't see that report as it comes out, but you can go on their website and see some of the early content that they have highlighted as important to the commission. You can pick one of those and say, why should the commission further accelerate one of these ideas and what should they do about it?
Great ideas. And I will make a plug that Federation of American Science bioeconomy advisor, now Jeffrey, since she wasn't able to make our writing workshop that we had a few weeks ago, there is a possibility she may be joining us in early January for our final panel. So I encourage the audience to stay tuned for that announcement to come out. But I see we are at 2 o'clock. So Aaron and Michael are any final thoughts that you'd like to add on to what Georgia said?
No, I think I really liked what Georgia put out there. I think some other really good points I think that came up in the discussion around how can we kind of look at level playing field and advance kind of transition of new technologies. And also I think more on a global level. I think what collaboration there is needed. I think that would be other topics I would put out.
And just a final note on collaboration. I think we're going to be most successful when we can bring public, private, nonprofits, profit sectors together to collaborate, but that creates challenges. IP ownership issues is just the one that we've talked about so far, but other things as well. So what are some really innovative ways that we can bring these sectors together and allow that collaboration to happen in efficient and effective ways?
All right. Thank you all. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Like we said at the beginning, we definitely encourage folks to consider submitting an article for this special issue. And we will be posting a recording of this to our YouTube channel in the next few days. So thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.